Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful Thursday. Beautiful day here in the Bay. Lovely sunny day, hardly a breeze blowing. So this is session one, but it's not really session one. It's sort of the preamble to session one. So I thought today we're going to wing it again, and I was just going to chat a bit, sort of more in a conversational style rather than any sort of training style around anxiety and panic. I've had a number of requests to talk on this topic, and today I'm not only going to talk on it, I'm going to be quite open and share a bit of my own anxieties and stresses and some of the panic that I've had to deal with during my lifetime. And the reason I share that is kind of just to establish some rapport and to show you that even us psychologists are quite human and we go through the same thing that our clients do. So hi Ray, thanks for joining us there from New Zealand. So today I'm just going to kind of talk you through the basics of anxiety and panic, and then we will get through to somehow, like I said, my experiences and then kind of the approach, and then what we're going to put together across the next about 10, 11, 12 sessions around anxiety and panic. So firstly, I just want to, hopefully it's not too distracting. I've decided to put like a scroll that tapers across the bottom of your page. I've had a few requests, people who are struggling to reach me, etc. So hopefully it's not too distracting. I'm also learning new skills as I'm playing around with the software. So the taper will give you my website, which is slightly outdated, but you can still reach me via my website. And then the other one is my email address. I just also want to please advise you that I may not enter into a therapeutic relationship with you via email or WhatsApp. I've had quite a few people contacting me via WhatsApp and hoping to get into a relationship without any formal contracting. So I don't mind touching base or giving you suggestions as to where one can get help, etc. I just can't answer long involved emails or long involved WhatsApps about your personal struggles without contracting into a therapeutic relationship. We're not ethically allowed to, and we're bound by the rules of the Health Professions Council of South Africa. Then I've also put there Fortigen. Fortigen is my coaching business, the one I work in corporations. Fortigen comes out of the word fortology, which is the science of mental strengths. And you'll see there the tagline is building strengths and nurturing genius. And then the gen comes from Genesis, or the development of. So Fortigen is about developing mental strengths. So that's what I do on my coaching side of my business. It's over and beyond my private practice work that I do. Hi Madeleine, thanks for joining us. All right, so let's chat a bit about this idea called anxiety and panic. Because anxiety and panic are extremely prevalent. Hi Rain, thanks for joining us. So what happens with anxiety and panic, often I hear people talking about, oh, I'm struggling with my anxiety, or my struggle with anxiety, or my struggle with depression. So I've decided to call this series Thriving with Anxiety or Panic, and maybe at a later stage we'll talk about thriving with depression or thriving with bipolar disorder, etc. But we can thrive with our struggles. So it's not about struggling with, and I think a much better way of talking about it would be living with, is the next way, living with my anxiety, and ultimately to move towards a place where we can be thriving with our anxiety. It is only anxiety after all, and it depends how much we fuse with it and how much we allow this anxiety to overwhelm us. So, all right, so let's move into this idea of anxiety in general. So like I said, it's a more conversation and rather than the training, because from the next session we're going to move into more training process of running through slides, etc. And I'm still trying to decide whether I'm going to run it live or whether I'm going to record it and then place it on Facebook. Maybe I'll do a live session afterwards for Q&A. The problem with anxiety or depression, for example, is that we become arguably in a way addicted to this way of thinking. And certainly before I became a psychologist, I was in sales. I come from a sales background, and I had agencies, and we were always chasing targets. And I realized I'd become quite addicted to being stressed. So anxiety, we can call anxiety a number of different things. Stress, anxiety, panic, fear, frustration, anger. All of these things will create that same kind of feeling as anxiety will inside of you. So stress is the same as anxiety. So some people just don't want to call themselves anxious and like to call themselves stressed, or won't even go there. If you had asked me if I was stressed during my sales days, I would have denied it. I didn't even think I was close to being stressed. But my rev counter was certainly sitting at around 8 or 9 out of 10, and that was my average. But I seemed to thrive on this adrenaline rush because it kept me going. And then on weekends I would crash and lie on the couch and hardly be able to move because I guess I felt quite burnt out come Saturday, Sunday. But So we shouldn't confuse us. And we're going to talk, as I said, I'm going to talk you around a process. I've sort of got myself a mind map, so I'll keep referring to it and try and sort of unpack it in some sort of cohesive whole as we go through it. And like I said, it's my own anxieties normally peak when I do these kind of talks, because I don't have the feedback from the people listening, the live audience. I can see guys listening in on Facebook, their names popping up, but there's none of that live feedback. So I'm just going to keep working around it as though I was having a conversation with a group of people. So please forgive me if we have some blips on the radar. So like I said, we become addicted to this way of thinking, and it creates a huge pathway for all our thinking to go in this direction. So we start thinking in terms of anxiety. Everything is a crisis, rather than everything can be calm. So I'm going to try and run through this thing and look at some of the symptoms. We're going to talk about the diagnoses that we have, and then sort of what happens, what goes on in the body, why that happens, okay, and then I'll talk a bit about my experiences, and then we'll sort of end off as we run through the process. So there's a big difference between anxiety and fear. Like I said, so fear or phobias have a natural subject that they're scared of: snakes, spiders, heights, etc. When it comes to anxiety, anxiety is this free-floating anxiety. We don't even know what we're scared of. You know, during COVID, are we scared of death? Are we scared of getting an illness? Are we scared of a family member dying? We don't even know what it is. So we have this generalized anxiety disorder. So one of the diagnoses, anxiety's got a number of diagnoses that we would diagnose clients with in psychology. Generalized anxiety disorder would be one of them. We even have the simplest diagnosis is adjustment disorder, because the minute we're moving into a new phase of our life, like we're all adjusting now to lockdown, then we're adjusting to getting back there. Now we're going to have to adjust to our kids going to school. And these are extremely anxiety-provoking situations, because it involves change. We just get used to one and then something else happens. So generalized anxiety disorder is one. Then we have panic disorder, which is extremely debilitating. And panic disorder is extremely frightening, and we'll talk about that just now. We also don't diagnose panic disorder alone or in isolation. Panic disorder is always diagnosed with agoraphobia, which is the fear of going out and a panic attack happening outside in a shopping mall or outside. So sometimes it can be so debilitating that we don't leave our houses. So we have panic disorder with agoraphobia or panic disorder without agoraphobia. And then of course we can have add-ons to anxiety disorders like obsessive compulsive disorder, possibly even erectile dysfunctions, these kind of things. Substance abuses can happen because of anxiety. And ultimately we can even have depression, because anxiety and depression sort of on the same continuum. Too much anxiety will give you depression, and having depression will also create anxiety. So they're on a similar continuum. Now, what happens in the body? So when we experience anxiety or panic, for example, straight away it's as though we were seeing a lion or something in front of us. So straight away your senses will be peaked, your pupils dilate so that you can get more information in. You're going to start hyperventilating to get more oxygen to the body. Your heart starts racing. This thing that you've seen, the snake or the spider or the lion that you've seen in front of you, sort of goes into the back of your mind first of all, and it sort of recognizes that there's lions. I'm not going to use big psychology words. Then it does hit the side of your head, which has got just behind your ears where the amygdala sits. And the amygdala is the fear part of the brain, the part that sort of sees and acknowledges fear. This then sends out an instruction to the kidneys, to the adrenaline glands to release adrenaline. This is what gets your heart pumping at a ridiculous rate, so that the oxygen can be pushed to your extremities, so that you can either run or go and fight with this lion or whatever it might be in front of you. And then of course your metabolism also slows down. We have an extreme peak in cortisol, adrenaline and noradrenaline in the body that gives you that shaky feeling and ability to sprint off at a pace to get away from the danger. So when we experience these symptoms, or these physiological changes in our body, these are natural changes that are designed for us to survive or to escape or to fight back if we presented with a crisis. So it's about survival. It's a survival mechanism. So the feelings in that are quite normal. So that's a starting point, is that anxiety is in our lives to protect us and for us to survive. But, so that's okay in short doses or small doses. We can't keep sprinting for a week or a year or 2 years. But we can sprint for 100 meters or 200 meters to get away from the danger. So when there's no lion in front of us or no saber-toothed tiger, this creates a problem. So the anxiety long-term, or stress over a long term, is extremely there's a decrease in productivity, and there's certainly quite a lot of illnesses, stress-related illnesses that can occur after a long-term panic. So I want to now just jump into some of my own experiences and to be quite open. And as I said, to anyone that knows me, I'm quite a self-disclosing psychologist, and I've had many of my own experiences. You know, we learn a lot at varsity, we learn a lot of theory, but I find sometimes you've got to apply the theory with a lived experience. And I'm happy to admit that I've had, arguably, stress and anxiety has been part of my life, my whole life, without me realizing it. Probably only once I became a psychologist could I look back at my life and realize, I've probably had anxiety most of my life. So let me just run through my own experience. First, I'll tell you what I experienced, and then I will talk a bit about how I kind of worked through my own stress and anxiety. So from an early age, I'm just going to go through my childhood, my 20s, then up into my 40s, and then even up to current days. So from a young child, I recall often having dizzy spells. I'd have these dizzy spells, and I didn't know what they were. I would be out skateboarding, or I'd be doing something active, and I was always quite a type A personality. I always came first in class, very good at sports, always involved in sports, so it was always go, 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 go. And I think my sport masked a lot of my anxiety, or managed to certainly get rid of the adrenaline rush that was happening with the underlying levels of anxiety in my psyche. But yeah, so I'd have these dizzy spells, and I'd rush off home and ask my mom for some. In those days it was 10 cents, and I'd go and buy 20 chappies, because you could get 2 chappies bubble gums for 20 cents, for 10 cents, and then I'd pop all these things into my mouth. So sugar became my way of self-medicating, and arguably that was my tablet, or as I said, my way of self-medicating. So regularly during my youth, my parents or my mom would take me to the doctors, and I'd have all these tests for diabetes, because they thought maybe there was a sugar shortage, that I was having to eat sugar all the time. But sugar became my own way of coping with these dizzy spells, because I knew if I just had a sip of Coca-Cola, or I decided to take some sugar, and possibly my sugar levels were dropping because of the high anxiety that I was undergoing without even realizing it, because that also eats away your the sugar in your body. So, and diabetes can come out of stress-related illnesses. So as an early age, it was the dizzy spells. And then there's another slightly, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I will bring it up, but it sort of fits a lot into, they call it parasomnias, and many people don't come to a psychologist for these things, but I have experienced them probably from as early as I can recall, from the age of about 5, and I'm somewhere around 50 at the moment, is what we call nowadays today, what we know today is sleep paralysis. So I'm not going to go into this, but sleep paralysis is an extremely scary situation that happens when we fall asleep, and then we wake up and we can't move, and it feels like our bodies are paralyzed. And there's a lot I know now about sleep paralysis, having experienced it most of my life. So I'm also I have no fear about sleep paralysis, although when people do experience this, they are so scared to even fall asleep, because it is petrifying when it happens, but it doesn't have to be. So we'll maybe chat about that in another session, or if you do experience sleep paralysis, then give me a tinkle and I'll talk you through it. Then I went into then in my 20s, I traveled around the UK and Europe, like most people did as a backpacker. And I was on the tube one day, and I've always been slightly claustrophobic, and I'll talk about that just now as well. And if anyone knows these tubes regularly stop in the tunnels, and sometimes 10 to 15 minutes the train can stop there, depending on what's going on in the station ahead. And the walls are very close to the outside of the train, probably less than a meter, 30 centimeters away from the sides of the train. And one day, spontaneously, probably after being a year of traveling overseas, the train stopped in the tunnel one day. It was 5 o'clock. It was chock-a-block with people in the train. Luckily, I'm tall, so I was standing in the middle with my head above the crowd, and this train stopped in the tunnel, and suddenly my heart started racing, and I had no idea what was going on. And this was what I thought was my first panic attack at that stage. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't run anywhere. I couldn't get out the doors, but it really felt like the walls were closing in. I felt extremely scared. Like I said, I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to run. There were people all around me. And all I did at that moment was decide, well, the only thing to do is to close my eyes and imagine that I was on some deserted island. I'd heard about visualization before, and so what I did was just close my eyes, waited, and started imagining I was on Mauritius or Seychelles or Reunion Island, or one of these beautiful beaches with huge open spaces around me. And before I know it, I think within the next 10 minutes the train started moving, and I'd managed to get through this first panic attack. And it was definitely a panic attack. It wasn't just an anxiety attack. Those panic attacks are extremely fear-provoking. Strangely enough, and I'm glad I experienced that after that, because after that, those panic attacks start jumping to other things. And in Psych 101, we learn about this little guy called Little Albert, who they would never be able to do such an experiment, but this experiment was probably in the 50s or so. And they taught Albert, was a baby, or 1 year old or so, and they brought a whole bunch of white cotton wool, and when they showed him the cotton wool, they banged cymbals and tambourines and drums, and he'd get this big fright when he saw this bundle of cotton wool. And they realized that your fear then his fear jumped onto rabbits, white rabbits, and then onto rats, white rats. So the fear can go to other places. So after that initial panic attack, I started having these things on buses, and wherever I was going, I could be in buses, and even sometimes in places where I'd be sitting quite comfortably with friends, and I would just have this overwhelming fear rise up in me. And I think this is one of the things that scares people the most, is that I didn't see a spider, they'll say, or I didn't see anything scary, but I just started having this panic attack in the strangest place. And again, all I would do is sit still, realize I can't get up and go run away or do anything, so I would sit there, no one would even know what's going on, and I would just allow this wave of anxiety to pass. And this went on through a number of settings, and I even became so fearful of how I was going to get back to South Africa, because I started thinking, was it claustrophobia? I didn't know if it was a panic attack. I had no idea what I was experiencing. It was just these weird, I call them weird feelings. And then I even thought, am I going to be able to get back on an aeroplane to get back home? Because that's when they close the door, I'm going to start getting more and more claustrophobic. So my brain was trying to jump onto all these different things. I thought, am I going to come home on a boat? And that might be more space, but it'll just take very long to get home to South Africa by boat. And in those days, cruise liners weren't the thing. So my mind was going through all these things, and like I said, I was 25 years old, 26 at the time. I had done an undergrad in psychology, but an undergrad BA in psychology, you don't really cover much. You only start really getting into the nitty-gritty from honors year. And I wasn't going to do that until my age of about 35, 36. So this is my experience of having my own ideas of panic attacks. And I remember the one day, actually, there's an interesting story to share. One day I was getting off the train at Waterloo Station, about to start my cross the road to do my 10-minute walk to where I used to work near Blackfriars Bridge. And I had a panic attack. As I was about to cross the road, I felt this, one of my triggers is that my heart would race, okay? Either a dizzy spell or my heart would I'd have heart palpitations, and this would trigger a sort of panic attack. So I started getting this panic attack as I was about to cross the road, and it was a turning point for me, because what happened that day was I was like, wow, this is actually quite cool. And I actually started to enjoy my panic attacks. It might sound totally weird, but I started to enjoy this adrenaline rush that I got from my panic attacks. And at that moment I thought, before I'd moved to London, we'd been living in Newquay in England, and I was washing dishes there for 6 months, and we'd been surfing 6 to 8 hours a day in between shifts of washing dishes and scrubbing floors and peeling potatoes. And and my whole life I've been active, sporty, etc. But in London, for that year in London, or 6 months in London, I was doing no exercise. I was waking up in the dark, coming home in the dark, getting on the trains. The only free time I had was on the weekend, where I'd go walk around some of the heaths and the greener areas. But it was my idea that I thought these panic attacks are now coming. So it was again a mental switch, or a life hack, if you want to call it, or a tweak in my brain that decided, well, this is quite fun, in inverted commas. And so that was in my 20s. Then at 35 to 40, became a psychologist. And then around 10 years ago, early 40s, I did Ironman and Comrades. And now I'm a psychologist. I've surfed my whole life, so I'm not scared of the sea. And in one of my sea swims, one of my first sea swims, when we arrived at the buoy out at sea, again, I had another panic attack. Now I knew what it was. I knew what to call it. I'm going, this is a panic attack. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I tried to pull my wetsuit away from my neck. I'm going, this is ridiculous. You're a psychologist. You understand what you're having a panic attack. You've surfed your whole life, so you're not scared of the sea. And I couldn't understand it. I had no idea what was going on. Again, the first feeling you want to do is flee or run. I thought about swimming back to the beach, but there were hundreds of people swimming towards me, so I couldn't go that way. And this all happened in the space of 10 seconds, let's say, 10 to 15 seconds. Okay, so this is not a long period of going through this panic, but it's a quick working through of my mind. The minute I identified it as a panic attack, I was like, oh well, it's going to go. It's really scary, but I can't respond to it, so I'm going to carry on swimming. So I let go my wetsuit and I carried on swimming. I thought of the words calm and relax, and I managed to, within the next 5 strokes or 5 minutes, the panic attack was gone. So I came to realize that these things come and go, and they come in waves and then they disappear. What I didn't know at that stage, and I'd never taken myself off to a psychologist, I'd never had to take any medication. I did, sugar was still my way of self-medicating. I'd often, like, if I felt dizzy, whatever. And as I said, I'm not sure whether the dizziness was caused by a drop in sugar or not, but if I drank a Coca-Cola or something like that, I felt better, or if I had some sweets with me. So I always had these, as I said, a way of self-medicating, as I said, with sweets. Fortunately for myself, I never used any medication, and I didn't necessarily need to see a psychologist. That's not to say psychologists are not necessary and medication is not necessary. There's definitely a place for them. And certainly if you are having debilitating panic attacks, medication would be recommended, certainly as a initial phase, just to get you into a space where you can work on how to fix the dilemma that you're struggling with. So where to from there, and how did I deal with it? So as I said, as a child I used to use the sugar. I would take sugar as my way of self-medicating. And then as I got into my 20s or 30s, often what I would do is I'd realize exercise. The one time we were about to start camping in my 20s as well, and I started having this panic attack, and I didn't run in those days, so I couldn't go for a jog. So what I did was do star jumps, and I've often said to people, if no one's looking and you're at home, star jumps used to work for me, burpees, push-ups, and I realized what I was doing intuitively was, because your adrenaline spikes, this adrenaline gives you that shaky feeling, and because I would then do star jumps or push-ups, this allowed my adrenaline levels to come down into a more manageable process, rather than feeling like I needed to run away or escape the situation. So this idea about visualization worked for me, exercise started to work for me, and then also just, as I said, breathing techniques and trying to keep, sort of bring a meditative state or a contemplative state, because the opposite of the stress response is a relaxation response. So one needs to look at ways of trying to bring your stress levels down to a much more manageable level, because if you're operating at 8 or 9 out of 10, there's nowhere for you to go when your stress or anxiety gets high. So you have to come off a lower base. And arguably the minute I became a psychologist and got away from this chasing of targets, my stress levels now, I would say, I sit between a 4 and a 6, and in my sales days it was between an 8 and a 10. That's kind of what my idling speed was. Then just to get back to what creates this panic attack now as a psychologist, and having surfed my whole life in the middle of the sea, and I'm thinking, where does this come from? What happens is, after your initial panic attack, the first panic attack will come from the external sources. After that, we all have our own triggers. So we become hyper vigilant to changes in our body. So I've mentioned to you before, for me, lightheadedness and maybe heart palpitations, or with a rising heart rate, would trigger a panic attack. And that's exactly what was happening in the water. So after that first panic attack, I realized, because I was sprinting out to that first buoy, my heart rate was spiking, and because it was spiking, this was triggering a panic attack, because my brain thought, there's a lion in front of you, or whatever it might be, and so you have the panic attack is triggered from an internal resources or physiological symptoms, rather than external physiological symptoms. And I don't want to go into it in too much depth now, but well, let me just quickly say, so after the second one, I got out to the buoy and I could feel a bit of panic. The third time I was out there, I was like, okay, where's this panic attack? Are you coming? And paradoxically, sometimes when I work with people that are struggling with panic disorder, the paradox is, I say to them, now go and have a panic attack next time, and I want you to come back and tell me about it. And just because they are now trying to have panic attacks, despite having 2-3 a day, they can't have one now, because it's the paradox of now wanting to have one. So these things sneak up on you, and there's a number of interesting ways we can deal with it, certainly in some of the new third wave of psychology approaches. So so these intuitive ways of dealing with it are quite interesting. Then also, and I chatted to someone this morning I bumped into while we were walking the dogs, and what people don't realize is that your first panic attack, and I've done many hypnosis courses, I am a certified hypnotherapist, but I don't use this in therapy, is that during the birth process, is many people that suffer from anxiety or panic disorder or claustrophobia, right at the birth process, there's normally complications. And I've known for a long time that I was a forceps birth, and so forceps birth, or nowadays they use suction, or if there are any complications during birth or long labor processes, that can be your first panic attack. And so a baby's heart rate spikes to 250, somewhere around there, I believe, as at birth, and that shows how stressed the baby is. So if you are caught in the birth canal, for example, that is your first struggle with anxiety. And so if it doesn't matter what age you are, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, you're going to go back. When your heart spikes again, you're going to go back to that. So the way I addressed the swimming thing was to start just swimming normally, swim out a lot slower to the first buoy, then it wouldn't come. As long as my heart rate went up slowly and didn't just quickly spike, it was okay. So what happened then was, so I was fortunate. I intuitively, just rather than fleeing away from situations, I've always learned to embrace these different things. And you'll see in all my talks, we've been speaking about acceptance and opening up to these feelings and fears that we have rather than running away from them. Even my phobia of spiders, I've learned to confront spiders. I haven't got to the point of holding a tarantula, but I certainly want to hold a tarantula if I have a chance. So if anyone's got tarantulas or know where I can go hold one, I'm up for the challenge. I wanted to just say that we're doing my internship, my first psychology supervisor, when I asked her, and this was in the days before acceptance and commitment therapy and some of the approaches and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, I said to her, why can't people be anxious? My understanding, and I've always liked to challenge authority and challenge conventional wisdom, let's call it. And one of the thoughts was to my first supervisor was, but why can't people have anxiety and depression? She goes, but Greg, no, it's our job to take it away from people. And I said, but I disagree, you know. So anyway, I've decided to forge my own way in with this process. And fortunately, since the year 2000, there's been a whole new wave of psychology which speaks to accepting our illnesses or accepting these things that we're struggling with rather than trying to run away. And through acceptance, they may become a lot more palatable, and we can start to learn to live with anxiety and depression, and we can start to thrive with anxiety and depression, and we can move in the direction of our choosing and in value directions with these struggles that we can have, our daily struggles. And I've shared what I've shared with you today because of my own lived experience. Because when someone comes to me and says, no one will understand, I'm having panic, and no one knows how scary it is, and well, I do. I've been there, and I'm no special. I'm no different to anyone else. I certainly do bring a wealth of life experience to my sessions, and I bring a wealth of lived experience to my sessions. So I know how scary a panic attack can be, and I know how scary it can be if you latch onto it and allow it to overwhelm you. And just like we've spoken about the quicksand metaphor, it will pull you down into a deep pit of deep despair because you won't be able to get out of it. So, so as I said, just briefly about these newer styles of working with these disorders: acceptance and commitment therapy, positive psychology, which works on your strengths rather than focusing on the illnesses, and then mindfulness-based cognitive behavior therapy, which are phenomenal approaches, which always they speak a lot more to acceptance of what you have rather than avoidance. And as I said, I could find hundreds of great anecdotes of clients that I've worked with that couldn't believe me when I said to them, you're going to leave here with your anxiety, but it's not going to bother you, because anxiety then becomes a kind of a friend, and it's something we'll chat about in subsequent sessions. So we're going to go on to, I just want to tell you a little bit about the series that we're going to put together. Like I said, I'm just unsure of how I want to do it because there's quite a lot of material in there. And I was playing around with it yesterday to see if it needs to be pre-recorded versus live. I haven't got slides and I haven't got time to go and put slides together. So somehow I want to talk about it. So I'm thinking I might pre-record them, run the recordings, and then be available straight after that presentation on some sort of a live session to discuss it. And maybe I'll just do a 15-minute talk through the presentation and then be available for sort of any questions at some sort of a live process. But I'm going to give that some thought today because that's not for you. So I want you to just to leave you today and just with this one thought, and it's quite an interesting thought that almost every single, Greg Smith included, when people with anxiety or panic disorder arrive for their first session, they go, give me a solution. Give me a tablet. It must go away. Take it away from me now. And then you'll get to the end of the first session. I'll be like, and then they'll want it to carry on because they're wanting more. They're wanting more. They're wanting more. I need to ask you that you have to trust the process. I need to request of you that there's a process when you're trying to work with anxiety. There's a process when you're trying to work with panic. Certainly, there's a number of instant breathing techniques one can do to lower your stress levels. But it's a process, and there's no quick fix. There's a quick fix. You can go take tablets or medication or alcohol or drugs, and that's going to take your anxiety away for that moment. All right. But either you're going to have to keep taking substances or keep taking your medication if you don't address the underlying problem and changing your lifestyle and changing your way of thinking and emotions and the way you deal with the thinking and the emotions. So please, as I said, you can't rush it. It's not a tablet. If you want long-term benefits, you have to change your lifestyle. You have to work with a professional, work with a coach, or work with someone that understands it. Because like I said, this amygdala, which sits in our brain, it's a very tiny thing. You can put it like this, it's like a thumb inside your brain. It sits there, but this amygdala hijacks this whole brain at times. And I often said to people, another interesting thought I had is that anxiety, if you give it too much power in your life, it's going to become like a bully in your life, and it's going to dominate you and tell you exactly how to run your life. And it doesn't have to. It can become a lot smaller. You can take control of your life again and live with your anxiety, and certainly start thriving with your anxiety. I've used my life as an example of how I've arguably lived with anxiety since my earliest memory of 3 or 4 years of age up until now in the healthy 50s. And I like to think that I've led a blessed life. I like to think I've thrived with my anxiety. And it does. It still creeps into my life every now and again. But I'm able to manage it and thrive with it. So thank you for joining me. If you like the post, please again say hi. I see a few of you. I see Nadine's name's also there, so I can't see who else joined the session. But look out for the next sessions. I'll be posting it. So the first session has already been pre-recorded. I just don't know how I'm going to put it out there yet. Thank you for listening. And yeah, if you tell your friends about these presentations, and yeah, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Cheers. Bye.